I'm originally from Ukraine. I lived in Ukraine the first 13 years of my life. After that, me and my mom moved to Austin, Texas, where I lived for 10 years. So I'm now 23 years old. However, majority of my family still lives in Ukraine. Most of my friends, family, I don't get to visit much because of the issues like today that you'll find out, but maybe one day I will. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. So I don't know, I'm just gonna step out here, how much all you guys know about Ukraine. So I'll just give a brief introduction and overview of what has happened. So just so you have a background information, okay? So this is the Ukraine. This here is the Crimea, the southern part of Ukraine, which most of you guys probably heard it in the news now. If you were to draw a map in your geography class, you would no longer draw this as part of Ukraine, you would draw it as part of Russia. And this is the eastern part of Ukraine, which has been militarized and has been going on a lot of military conflict in there. Well, it all started in November when our former president, Viktor Yanukovych, decided not to sign an agreement with the European Union. And as some of you know, Ukraine is a very corrupt country. Because he didn't sign this agreement, he signed an agreement with Russia, and a lot of protesters, a lot of people went into Kiev in Maidan, which is, you probably heard in the news, called Maidan Square. That's a big area in Kiev. Thousands of people within days after not signing the agreement appeared there. One of the groups that appeared there were the private sector, which is translated to the right sector. Now this group is, I don't want to say fascist, but they are very fascist. They motivate their supporters with fear, which is probably one of the strongest motivating tools you can have. So by motivating people with fear, a lot of people follow them. Now in the beginning they followed them because they wanted to overthrow our former president. After that has happened, people begin to realize that this group is not the ideal group to have in the government as a new government. So things started to unfold, and that's why there's a lot of military conflict and military actions in Kiev. So that has happened. Then in March, Crimea, after noticing what was happening in Kiev, didn't want the same outcome, didn't want the same future. It is largely populated by Russians. Now we're all Ukrainian. When I say Russians, Ukraine and Russia, it's like brother and sister. We have the same language. Now Ukraine does have its own language, but it is like Spanish and Portuguese. So it's equivalent. However, we do have different languages. But Crimea always considered themselves as part of Russia. And they didn't want the same outcome that they had in Kiev, so they decided to have elections. Now I'll talk about this more in presentations, but after elections happened, over 90% of the people in Crimea voted to become part of Russian Federation. Now when I say 90% voted, that doesn't mean that 100% of the population voted. I don't know what the exact number is, but I think only 60% in Crimea voted. So out of the 60%, 90% wanted to become Russian Federation. Even if the entire population voted, they'd probably still be part of Russia. And that was a big news about it because Russian troops, Russian military came into Crimea when the elections had happened to provide security. Because later you find out in the video, Ukrainian army doesn't have the means, doesn't have the funds, and the military to provide security for them against the right sector. Okay. So after that, after Crimea, we have elected a new president. Now, electing a new president, everyone would think that conflict should stop because we have the new government. Things should settle down. Well, things did not. Things got much worse. And the reason they got worse is people in Crimea did not recognize him as being elected by the constitution. People in the east of Ukraine did not recognize him to be elected by the constitution. Now, because of this, the only way you can be elected constitution is because our former president was still alive. He was not impeached, and he was able to pursue the duties that he could. In order to have legitimate president after him, he would have to either be impeached, which takes a long democratic process, he would have to be dead, or he could no longer do his duties. Now, he had all of those, so this is why Eastern Ukraine and Southern Ukraine did not recognize him to be our president. So when that happened, the military conflict broke out heavily in the east. Before this, the conflict, there wasn't actually military conflict here. People just wanted to separate. But the real conflict with deaths and fire and tanks and military operations happened here. So after that, we had another incident, which probably you all heard of, the Malaysian Flight 17. That has happened also in Ukraine. Now, it was shut down close to the Donetsk area, and Ukraine released a statement pretty quickly after this happened that it was Russian missile that shut the plane down. Now, you have to understand, if it happened somewhere around here, Russia denied that their military troops were ever there. However, it's debatable if they were there, if not. But even if their military troops weren't there, somebody who operated that weapon, it is not an easy weapon to operate to shut the plane down that is so high in the air. Either they had to provide training, or the military had to be there for that to happen. So when that happened, obviously the entire world got involved because it was no longer just a problem in Ukraine. Things started escalating. So those are the things I wanted to give you kind of a background, what has happened up to now. Now there are more conflicts obviously that's happening, but up to this point, this will pretty much, you will understand what's going on. Now the main fights that are going right now are in Donetsk, then Luhansk, and Mariupol. Now, I know this graph is mostly spoken Russian, and that is true, but because they speak Russian, that doesn't mean they don't speak Ukrainian. People here also speak Ukrainian. I'm from the central part of Ukraine, Cherkasy, and my first language was Russian, but my entire family, all my friends spoke Ukrainian. So just because this all in blue, and it says spoken Ukrainian, most people spoke Russian there as well. So, and you have to understand, it's a conflict. It's hard to see people die here because of the people they're fighting from here, because we're all the same. We're all brothers and sisters, so it's a difficult conflict. Now, next slide I want to show you is, this is the Maidan I was talking to you about. So this is what it looked like before the conflict happened. Now, this is what it looked like after the right party has come in and overthrew the government. Here is Cherkasy, this is where I'm from. Kiev is where the conflict started. Here's Crimea, and here is Luhansk, Donetsk, and this is really close to the Russian border, so this is why there's a lot of tensions going on up there. Okay. Okay. Now, this slide, I'm going to start talking about the New York Times article that I presented for you guys. So this was about the article, and what we're going to talk about is the put-in phone call to Obama to see how we can resolve the situation that's going on in Ukraine. So some of the key points that we'll talk about is the Moscow annexed the Crimea. Did Russian military aggression put edge on the entire Europe as a whole? And it is fair to say, I think, that most of you weren't alive, and I wasn't alive there too, but most of you read about this in your history books and in high school about the Cold War. Now, the Cold War tensions between Russia and the United States were pretty bad, but I think it's fair to say that now the tensions Russia and the EU and the United States having with Russia are probably the worst since then. The policies that we have towards Russia now are probably more harsh than we ever been. And we'll talk about the sanctions that has been implemented by that as well. So yeah, we'll talk about the Barack Obama, what he has proposed, how he has been helping Ukraine. And we'll talk about the G8. It used to be the G8, now it's the G7, because most of you don't know if you know, but G8 party has kicked Russia out, so it's now only the group of 7 countries. So this is the first one. So Russian aggression in Crimea. This photo here is taken in front of the airport in Crimea. which the airport has been, when Russian troops came in, on the news, all over the American news, in newspaper, it's been obviously known, it's been widely known that first thing what Russian military troops did is take over the military bases there in Crimea, and also all the airports. There's two main airports, two airports. But when we say Russian troops came into Crimea, it's important to understand, I think I have it on this slide, that this happened in Simferopol, which is, you could say, the capital of of Crimea. Now, Kiev is the capital of Ukraine, but Simferopol is the capital of this area. Now, this is where the argument happened that Russian troops have come in. But at first, when I was in America and I was to hear a lot of people, not necessarily news, but a lot of people tell me that, well, why are there thousands and 20,000, 30,000 troops in Crimea? Well, that's because they have their base in Simferopol. For over 200 years now, this is where they had their fleet. Now, it's not their major fleet, but they do have their fleet there. So when you hear that there's thousands of troops, majority of them are on their base in Sevastopol. But that's true that not vast majority, but a lot of them have moved into Simferopol to, depends on what side you want to argue, either annex the Crimea or provide protection for the people. So important to know that they have their base there. So when this happened, obviously, Ukrainian government was felt worried, and American government, similar situation, compared the situation to what happened in Georgia, what actually happened in South Ossetia when Georgian troops were there. Now, Russian troops came in and pretty much bullied the Georgian troops. So completely overtook that state and recognized it as its own separate state. So a lot of people argued that now it is the similar thing that is happening in Crimea. So the Russian Federation is somewhat, if you want to look at it like that, expanding. They have South Ossetia, and now they have Crimea. This is the slide you've seen before. Now, don't let the title scare you or anything. I'm not trying to scare anybody here, the Second Cold War. But I just want to implement is that how tensions have built up to the point to where American news and the public are asking, is Russia really trying to expand their empire? Is there really going to be a second Cold War? Well, I don't think it will, but the tensions are high. But I don't think the United States or any other European countries will go to war with Russia over Ukraine. There has to be some kind of solution, but it's just good to recognize that this is real deal. This is scary. And I want to play you guys a video about the people themselves. I've been talking here, but I wanted you guys to hear, and there'll be subtitles, the people of Crimea themselves, what they are saying to the New York Times reporter about the situation and what's going on, and about the troops themselves. And you will also hear the story from the Ukrainian military that is close by the Crimea. Bless you.
The other way.
Christoph, help me here.
The other way.
There we go. Okay, so here's the video. It's a short video, but
we won't have sound because we won't have sound.
There won't be sound, but you can see the subtitles. I speak in Russian anyway, so but you can read the subtitles. This is a picture where I showed you earlier. Now, there's an American reporter, he's saying right now that they were trying to get into these buildings, but there are people who don't say where they're from, and they won't let them in. And they ask everybody for their ID. And this gentleman is talking about the situation in Kiev, what happened there, and that they don't want the same future for Crimea. By the way, these trucks, most of them do not have, there was one truck they found with the license plate, which they will show. Most of them don't have license plate, most of them don't have any marks, and most of them don't, now you see the license plate said Russia on it, but the majority of them do not have license plate. And this, I don't know if he's a general or a captain, but he's of the Ukrainian army, and he was talking to the press, there he is. He was saying that they speak the same language, but they will not tell me where they're from or what they're doing here. And this is the base of the Ukrainian army here. As you see, they're receiving orders from Kiev that within days, the Russian military that has came over to Crimea, they will keep expanding, and they will take over their bases. So the Ukrainian captain of his battalion there, he's saying that they will not take over. Yes, they are. They are strong. They have weapons, but we will fight for our pride. Is pretty much what they're saying. So as you see, there are people in Crimea who wanted Russia to come in, who wanted to protect them. Now don't get me wrong, just because you see this video, don't think that this is 100%. There are people in Crimea who are the ones who did not vote, who didn't want them there. They wanted Russian soldiers there, and a lot of them migrated back to the central Ukraine. A lot of them, they moved pretty much, and this is what's sad, because of conflicts like this. Families have to move. They have to get their kids out of school. So this is why it's important to know it's chaos. It's not just about the war, but also the families are being misplaced. So now I just want to talk to you a little bit about the sanctions. What has the United States and what has the EU done since the conflict has happened? Well, at first, Barack Obama has placed sanctions on individuals. Only individuals. I think at first it was 7 individuals. There were a few from Crimea, most of them were from Russia, and he froze their bank accounts, did not let them fly, but obviously Russia laughed at those sanctions because they mean nothing. So after that, it got a little bit more serious, and if you know anything about Russia, Russia is very rich in natural gas, very rich. You can compare it to, I would say, Saudi Arabia in oil. So these would be the comparison. So they have stopped operating long-term and medium-term loans. Now they can still do their short-term based operation just so that these energy and banks, these huge big banks in Russia, don't collapse. But in terms of long-term medium loans, they're stopped. The United States does not fund them anymore. And some of these are Rosneft, which is a state-owned national company oil, Gazprom, also a gas producer, Novatek is a state-owned natural gas producer, and then you have the Gazprom Bank, which is the financial arm for the Gazprom. So you see how this was actually a big deal, because now you have your energy and your financial systems are separated from, I'll say, one of the leading countries in the world, the United States. Now Europe, on the other hand, also United States encouraged European countries to do this. However, you have to understand that a lot of European countries are being supplied gas from Russia, so they are not as brave as the United States. They cannot just afford to do this. So what they have done, they've implemented sanctions that will, if Russia wants to start new projects, then Europe will not fund them. That's what pretty much they did. Now, they're not hard sanctions, and Russia laughs at those sanctions because they make no sense. But Europe just cannot afford. They cannot be brave as the United States can. So And if you guys have any questions whatsoever, I'm just keep talking. But if you have any questions, just let me know. I want to, if you wanted to know something, just ask me. You don't have to wait till the end of the presentation, okay? Now, this is the G8 that I was talking about. So obviously, Russia is no longer part of this. The Great Britain, Canada, France, United States, Italy, Japan, and Germany decided to kick them off. And I think this was, I wouldn't say it hurt Russia, but obviously not being part of this, it cripples them, I guess, maybe instead of pride, because they are the biggest country in the world. They should be part of this, but because of their actions, because United States and Europe accused them of grabbing land, which is not ethical in our time now. That's not how democratic countries work, or which Russia is. So they kicked them out of the G8. Now the next, what I want to do is I wanted to show you guys. I think this would be really important, really cool. What are people in Russia being informed of? So this is the news from the New York Times. This is what you guys know. This is what I read. But also, it's important to know what people in Russia think of us. What are they thinking of this situation that happened in Crimea? And my source, I got it from the Channel 1 in Russia. It's probably the major source of information where people get their information from. So I just wanted to share with you about the same topics. It would be very similar topics, but what they're saying. So start with the tensions in Crimea. United States says they invaded Crimea. Now on the news in Russia, they protected the Crimea. So you see how it's a bit different there. Also, 96%, they also report this, obviously, that 96% of the people in Crimea voted to become part of Russia. So you see how this could seem that it is perfectly okay. It was their choice. It was the choice of people to become part of Russian Federation. Pretty much what Putin has done is just provided protection, which, if that's how you see it, it's okay to do. You would want to protect your own people, your own language, to do what they want, because the government is there to help the people. The people are not there to serve the government, and is what happened in Crimea. They made a choice to become part of Russia. Now they vastly cover the right sector, like I told you about, and I think this might be the video I'll show you. What they are about. They are a fascist group. They motivate people with fear. They're very scary. They were one of the reasons why I did not go to Ukraine this past summer. It wasn't because Russian troops were there. It wasn't because the East was fighting against the Ukrainian troops. It was because of them. You have to understand, when the government is overthrown, you have somebody new coming in. There's no police. There's nobody to protect you. This group can stop you. And if you're not with them, if you don't believe what they believe, they can do whatever they want with you, because there are no government to protect you. So it was a big deal. That's why Crimea didn't want the same pass. And I'll play this video for you, okay? We can figure it out. Okay. This video, the next one will be about them. This video, actually, it's about what's going on in the southern part, eastern part of Ukraine. Because obviously, on the New York Times, you've been covered that you see the military from Russia coming in across the borders to Ukraine. That may be true. Russia's denying it. But however, what you cannot deny, and what you will see in this video, there are ex-military that are just regular people now. There are regular people, regular civilians who are by choice, decide to come to Ukraine, to Donetsk, and help the people who are fighting there against the Ukrainian military. So it's important to know, yes, maybe Putin is not sending the soldiers there himself. However, you will see there's a lot of people who voluntarily come there. Now, I don't know if maybe there's speculation somebody's hiring them, because they are ex-military. They know how to fight. These not regular people. But they do come over and help the rebellion. So here's... you see, this is how people live there at the moment. All the schools are destroyed, all the hospitals. And by the way, this is within the city limits, so this is not like there's no civilians around there. In villages close by the cities. And also in Ukraine, apart from the eastern part of Ukraine, the entire Ukraine, they only can show, there's a few channels and they're only Ukrainian. They cannot show, now I think this is kind of ridiculous because nowadays we have internet, so it makes no sense to do this. Especially with they don't have any kind of firewall, but what they've done is, there are no other channels but Ukrainian. You can only watch Ukrainian news. Now in the eastern part, they have installed the Russian channel, so the people there are watching what you are watching right now. Now these are the kind of military you see on the news that they're talking about, the Russian fighters, Russian military. Well, these are the guys that they're fighting on. They're working out on their own. Now somebody has to supply them with weapons, obviously, because it's not cheap, and they're fighting the army, of Ukrainian army. So somebody's supplying them with this stuff. But you see, they're not your average soldiers. They maybe once were in the military, but they're now just regular civilians. So these are the main, we call them separatists, the main people, the main rebels. You see people in Eastern Europe. These are the guys that are fighting the Ukrainian army. So, okay. And like I mentioned before, what is difficult to understand, normally when you have a battlefield, you fight out in the field. I don't know, when I used to watch the news, I watched Iraq, I see people firing from the distance. Now this is a little bit different. This is fighting within the school, within the hospitals, you know. People use other humans as a shield. So it's completely wrong. It's not right what the rebels are doing, because they have to understand that the people that are getting shot by the Ukrainian army are their own people. But it's happening, so. Okay, our next slide. So our next slide is, I think, watching a lot of the news, I made a decision that, to me, it seems more of United States versus Russia. We've gone away from the real problem, which is what is going on with the actual people in Ukraine. This has been more of a conflict, like I mentioned before, the Cold War conflict. What is going on with the two major powers? Now we have our new president has been elected, Petro Poroshenko, and it's a good thing, I think, because he's new. He has no blood on his hands. He is someone who can fix the problem, because the problem will not be fixed through the third parties. Yes, the United States is a very powerful country. Everybody knows that. The United States is a leader. Russia is a huge country. Putin, bad, good, he's also a leader and a great one. Now the things that he might be doing aren't so great, but people follow him in Russia. There's a reason why everybody celebrated in Russia when Crimea was taken over. He's the first president in Russian Federation who has not given away land. He's the first president who has actually taken it back. So you see why there's a lot of spirit behind him in Russia. Now, that has nothing to do with Ukraine, because they will not solve the problem. Yes, they can help the problem, and Russia backing off can help the solution, but the real solution will come from our new president. He has to be the one, not send the army to fight the people, to fight to kill children. There are children dying because bombs are being dropped on houses, and Ukrainian military has no idea what they're doing. These are 17, 18-year-old kids who are just graduated. Now they have to fight. The military is bankrupt. There is no money. There's no training whatsoever. So there are innocent people dying. What he has to do, he has to go in and talk to the eastern part of Ukraine himself. He has to make compromise through dialogue. This is the only way I think the solution can be reached. Now, rebuilding the Russian Empire. So, multiple times Putin said that he doesn't want to rebuild the Russian Empire, but what he said and what he does are a bit contradiction, and obviously you can see that. There's South Ossetia now, Crimea. And he's been asked, I think it was by a French reporter, he said once that separation of Soviet Union was the greatest, and we covered this yesterday I think, was the greatest collapse of all time. It was the greatest, now he didn't say it was economic or political, he's mentioned humanitarian. It was a humanitarian tragedy of all time. Now, I tend to agree with him, because overnight, you have to think of Soviet Union, there are 16 republics altogether. Overnight, you have 26 million people who were Russian. They are now told that they are no longer Russian. They are now told that they can not come here. They live, for example, my family in Ukraine. We had lots of family from Russia. Now they're told that you are Ukrainian, you're now an immigrant. So you have families, this is in 1991, you have families that are separated from each other. You don't have an iPhone, you don't have a cell phone to call them and see how they're doing. This is a big deal. People lost their jobs. The children who went to different schools now have to move. So because of that, it was a huge crisis. Now, Putin doesn't try, he said he doesn't try to rebuild the empire. Now, there's different things that are actually being said and being done, but those are the things that are going on. I just want to make sure you guys understand that I think personally that it is not a conflict, should not be a conflict between US and Russia. It should be something that resolved within the Ukraine, not through third parties. Okay. Now, this conflict will not be resolved as easy. You have to understand, life in the United States, and I'm glad I'm here, I love this country, is a lot different in Ukraine. For example, let me give you an example. When I was in Ukraine, we often drove on highways. This is the police in Ukraine, and it's not their fault. It is the government's fault that they're doing this. They will stop you because you are speeding. Now, the customs here is to give them your driving license and your registration, right? Well, you do that in Ukraine, it will take you hours before you can get out of there. And after the hours, he will call his partner down 10 miles down the road, and he will stop you again. Now, what they're really trying to do when they stop you is get money from you, so bribery. So you have to learn when you come to Ukraine. Now, I hope this doesn't happen anymore. Now we have obviously a new president. You put $20 bill in your driving license, and you give it to him. And he'll take it, he'll look, he said, okay, good luck, see you later. That kind of thing. So this is why the conflict is difficult. Another one is, this right here is what's going on in our House of Representatives. Okay? This is right here. Now, this gentleman right there, he is currently our Prime Minister of Ukraine. Okay? Arsenii Yatsenyuk is his name, so make sure I say. He's right there. So he's obviously in the middle of the fight, and currently he is our Vice President. So you see how what's going on here reflects what's going on to the people of Ukraine. Now, people are tired of this. People are tired, and I've seen this growing up. This is nothing new. I've seen this growing up in Ukraine. This is how decisions are made about Ukraine. Now, I don't know what they're fighting about. It's crazy, but this is obviously reflects on the people. What they're doing there is the country. This is the country we have, the country that always fighting, the country that there's no order, obviously, here. So I just want to show you that there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of change to be done. This has to stop in order for this to stop. So now, to kind of finish up my presentation, I'm going to give you my personal opinion. I'm going to let you know I have a lot of family and friends in Ukraine, and speaking to them and what they have told me so far. and this is the quote I put up from JFK, I think. While you guys read it from there, it kind of summarizes what I think can help Ukraine. I have family members, actually my uncle, my mom's brother, amazing guy. Now, my mom doesn't talk to him on the phone anymore because of the situation in Crimea. When we call them and we ask him what's going on there, my mom kind of disagrees with him. He thinks that Putin, I don't want to say this, but he's a Hitler. He is taking over Ukraine. He wants the entire Ukraine. After he gets the entire Ukraine, he will not stop. He will continue to Belarus. If you know Belarus, just north of Ukraine. Now, to rebuild the empire that everybody says is the Soviet Union empire, you have to have Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. Those are three main countries to have. Now, my uncle is a sure believer, and there's millions of people like him who believe in this, that Putin is trying to rebuild the empire, and he is not helping the situation. Now, I also have friends and family members. They obviously don't talk amongst each other, which I think is bad. Everybody, when they start about politics, people tend to go separate ways, even if they're close friends. They think that Putin is a great leader. What he has done in Crimea, he has helped the people. He has protected the people from what happened in Kiev. He has given them the choice to vote, and they're voted. So you see, you have both of those things. So it's not, I want to mention this, in our leadership department, we have this quote, think great, right? So it's not always a yes or no answer. And it is, I think, reflects back to this, because it is not an answer if what Putin's doing is bad or good, or what people are doing, or Ukrainian army is doing good or bad. There are lots of scenarios, and there are people who want different things. And there are people who just want to be left alone. They do not care, like the people there in Eastern Europe. There are lots of them who don't really care, obviously care deeply inside who they want to be with, but because the situation got so bad, their kids are dying, elderly people on the street dead, they just want to be with someone who's going to give them peace and will not fight anymore. So I think it's important to understand that it's not always black and white. It's not a yes or no answer. There are lots of nuances that go on in this. And I want to mention, I love living here in the United States. It is awesome. I'm glad I'm here. I obviously feel bad that my family is going through this, but it's ironic, I think, when the United States says that, well, Russia is taking over the borders that are near them, and Russia is taking over Crimea, when thousands of miles away from the United States armed military goes there and dictates the government there. So I think it's a bit ironic saying that. Now also, it's ironic to say that because the United States is the most powerful military. Yes, Putin is a leader, but and he maybe uses his military to bully other countries, but you gotta think his military is not that powerful, it's not that great. United States spends more money on their military than the entire world combined, including Russia. So to say that he's aggressive with his military from the United States, yeah, it might be true, but it's ironic because the United States obviously spends more money on their defense system than every other country. But like I said, it is not about the United States. It is not about Russia. It is about Ukraine, and it's about our new president, Poroshenko, to fix the situation himself through peace. He cannot do this through violence. The violence will not help. The violence will only escalate things further and further and further. So I think I'm pretty much finished up. Do you guys have any questions for me you want to ask me? Or I hope I didn't hurt anybody's feelings here. I just said I love living here, but like I said, it is not just the United States is a powerful country, and to say that what Russia is doing within their borders is a bit ironic, knowing that thousands of miles away, the United States does make decisions, and they are a very influential country. So, do you guys have any questions? Any questions at all? Any? No?
Sergey, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, if people in Crimea largely culturally associate themselves with Russia anyway, would splitting that off and having it become part of Russia, like if Russia ratified that and Ukraine decided, okay, we're going to give up that territory or whatever, and they're going to be part of Russia now, I mean, would that be more like a more long-term sustainable thing, or is that just like not in the cards in Ukraine?
No, yes, I agree, and it would be, and I feel like before the war started, people in Crimea, it's a city, obviously you see on the Black Sea, there's a lot of tourists there. A lot of that money goes to, Ukraine takes a lot of the money, the Kiev takes a lot of that money, a lot of those funds, and they go back. So you see one part of the country takes it all, and the other one is giving it, and it doesn't work like that. It's similar in a relationship. You cannot just always take. You have to give and take. It has to be both. So Crimea always wanted to, I wouldn't say separate, but they were always, the people weren't happy there. Because see, Ukraine always took that away. But in terms of going into Russia, are you right? I think like Ukraine might be happier. It will be easier for Ukraine, but it's in terms of pride. The pride that the government does not want to give the land away. It's sense of pride. Same thing with Ukrainian. Yes, Ukrainian pride. Yeah, it's more than that. Now Ukraine knows its army is completely irrelevant. There's no army whatsoever. I remember growing up, one of the reasons I came to the United States is because I didn't want to go to the army in Ukraine. It was mandatory, and it wasn't because it was scary, because the training was so hard. No, it's because there was no funds. When you go to the army, there's nothing to eat. Now, I don't know if you know about winters in Ukraine. They're not paradise. It's not warm and shiny. The winters there are bad. This is we have the same winters as they do in Moscow. And if you know about World War II, when Germany took over, went into Russia, one of the reasons that they backed out after a couple of years because of the winters. The winters there are really harsh. So you're imagining not having shoes, not having socks, and being in the army. People don't survive those kind of things. So obviously the army is not competent enough to even protect Crimea. But it's the sense of pride. It's the sense of it's ours. We will not give it back. That's why it's being. So. Yeah. Anybody else? Questions? No, well.
I actually have a question. So this wasn't the focus of your presentation, but what's the role of women in this conflict?
Yeah, the women are, actually yesterday we showed, there was a lot of women who do go to protest, and in terms of Kiev, they helped with things like food, like cooking. They helped in terms of like nursing, hospitals. Right now in Eastern Crimea, taking care of kids. So that kind of role, just playing while the men are. Now, don't get me wrong, there are women who are protesting themselves. They are in, they go out there and I don't say they have a gun in their hand, but they are brave. But majority of them to that kind of the housekeeping, make sure that everybody's healthy, because you got to think when the government is not operational, now it is. Now we have a president, but before that, when it wasn't operational, you have hospitals broken down, everything. So you have to be somebody to kind of help the injured. So that's what I'm doing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the relationship between the Azov battalion and the right-wing sector? Are they an extension of the right-wing sector?
The right-wing sector, I want to show you a video of this. I have to explain. So the right-wing sector was good for a period of time. For a period of time in terms of they wanted to overthrow the government, just like majority people did. Majority people want the government out because it was corrupt, because it wasn't doing the things that people want them to do. Now, after the government was overthrown, the right people quickly realized that the right sector could be worse than the government was before, because a lot of the leaders of the right wing were part of terrorist groups that fought in Chechnya wars, for example. There was one guy, I think his nickname was Muzichka, I think it was. This guy was vicious. He would come into government buildings, and obviously the government is overthrown, so majority of them are gone. But there will still be people there, because not everybody is a bad guy just because you work for the government. There are good people there. And those that were left, he would literally terrorize them. He would tell them the things that the government done wrong. He would blame the individuals themselves, not knowing who they were. So people were afraid of the right-wing sector. And I want to show you a video about them. I think it has English subtitles, which is just to give you a sense who they are, who these people are. think it's right here. Now, to me, this is the guys why I didn't go to Ukraine, like I mentioned before. It wasn't because of the military of Russia, it was because of these guys. I think there's subtitles here. Okay. Going back to history. This is the pictures you saw aftermath. After this happened, this is happening in Maidan, the pictures you were seeing later. I mean earlier. This is how they become overthrown in government, not just with the people themselves, but the actual historical monuments that were there. They had nothing to do with the government in charge. They were just literally ripping Ukraine apart. Now, obviously, you see his words with our new president coming into power. Now, you have to imagine, before the elections, these guys were still in charge. They wanted to put somebody of their own in their office, or they wanted to at least command who's going into presidency. Now, after we became thank God, our president was at least realized that these guys are crazy. They give these guys power, and you don't know what they will do with Ukraine. So he pretty much overthrown them. I would say there were restrictions. They could not have weapons. Because they would literally walk around with AK-47s around the streets. It was, killing people for them was nothing. It was just another day. So, yeah, they were scary guys. They're no longer, as far as I know, none of them are. I mean, there are people who believe in that kind of stuff, and majority of them from the western part of Ukraine. But in terms of actual huge force like it was during the Kiev, during the Maidan protesters, they're not there anymore. So, yeah. Anything else, guys? So I just want you guys to, if anything you remember today to walk away is, I want you to understand that the only way for Ukraine to better themselves is, like I said, it's not through the third parties of Russia and United States. They are powerful countries, but it's through our own president. Our own people have to recognize what they want, and our own leaders within a country have to make decisions on their own. We do not need to ask for money from the United States to supply our army with guns, to supply our army to get the offensive over Russia. That's not what we need. We need somebody who is able to talk, who is able to negotiate with people. Now, things will still be different. You will not get the same thing you want, but at least people will not be dying. So, yeah. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.